in September, my friend Chris texted the group chat, "The Substance is the craziest shit I've ever seen." That was on a Wednesday. On Thursday, the other member of the group chat, my friend Reagan, texted me to say, "That was the craziest movie I think I've ever seen. Like, there's nothing anyone can say to prepare you for that, so good luck." On Friday, I saw The Substance, and I texted them, "The Substance fucking rips." Because it does. For the record, both Chris and Reagan said they hadn't really stopped thinking about the movie since they saw it, and by the time I saw it a couple days later, they'd both come around on it and agreed that it fucking rips. Reagan saw it 2 more times in theaters. And I'm not trying to hard sell how bonkers the movie is, though it certainly is. I'm just trying to prepare you in the same way I was prepared. I'm trying to give you the same information I had when I dove in for the first time. I think it was helpful that Chris and Reagan and Sean Fennessy primed me for how deranged and bloody the movie gets without really telling me anything else about it. I didn't read any reviews. I didn't watch any trailers. I just knew it had Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley and intense body horror, and that it won Best Screenplay at Cannes, and it had the craziest shit I've ever seen, ×2. If you haven't seen The Substance and you want to have the same experience I did, which, again, I had a great time, you're now up to speed. You can turn this off now if you like. For everyone else, Demi Moore plays Elizabeth Sparkle, a fading celebrity who won an Academy Award a few decades ago, but also appears to mostly be famous for hosting an aerobics class on TV. Put a pin in that. Basically, the second Elizabeth turns 50, she's fired from her show, and the network starts looking for a new, younger, bouncier host. Elizabeth learns of a mysterious black market product called The Substance that promises users a younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of themselves. But it's initially kind of vague on the details and doesn't really elaborate on what exactly the product is or what it does. Intrigued and desperate, Elizabeth places an order. When she opens her starter kit, there are some very explicit instructions on how to use the product and a few warnings about not deviating from those instructions, but it's still not really saying what the product actually does. Even without this knowledge, Elizabeth injects herself with the activator. She then births Margaret Qualley, basically, and not in the traditional way, in more of a David Cronenberg fashion. And then Elizabeth finds herself looking down at her own unconscious body on the bathroom floor, and when she looks in the mirror, she is Margaret Qualley, the so-called younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of herself as advertised. While living as Margaret Qualley, she calls herself Sue.
I'm Sue.
And apparently Sue is exactly what the network is looking for in the new, younger, bouncier host of their aerobics show, so Sue takes over the job that Elizabeth was fired from. Happy ending, right? Elizabeth had been clinging desperately to her show and her fame and her relevance, and now, thanks to The Substance, she gets to be relevant again. Kind of. The movie says over and over and over and over again that when you use The Substance, you are one. Your old self and your new self are both you. And yet, Elizabeth and Sue quickly become at odds. There's mutual resentment between the two of them. They both act selfishly without regard to the other. But as the movie's quick to remind you, they are one, so their animosity towards each other is really self-hatred and self-destruction.
It's a metaphor.
The very explicit instructions in the starter kit say that she must live 7 days as her other self and then switch back to her old self. 7 days on, 7 days off, no exceptions. It's very important the movie establishes these clear rules so that the audience will start to squirm when these rules are inevitably broken. Literally everything about The Substance should put you on alert. From the mysterious way Elizabeth finds out about it, to the sketchy and weird order and pickup process, to the gross and dramatic things it does to Elizabeth's body even when it's working as intended. This is all telling you that Elizabeth is playing with fire here, and this product is volatile and dangerous under the best of circumstances. So once she starts to bend the rules of The Substance, you get so nervous waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it does, several times, with escalating consequences, including the craziest shit I've ever seen.
There's been a slight misuse of The Substance.
The headline of this movie has been Demi Moore. She won the movie's only Golden Globe, and she's the current Vegas favorite to win Best Actress at the Oscars. For now. I think she's pretty spectacular in this. An awful lot is asked of her, both emotionally and physically, and she really carries the movie. I don't know if you could call this a career comeback necessarily, because she has been working steadily. Maybe not in the movies that I'm watching, but she has been working. All the same, she hasn't had this much acclaim and attention in decades, if ever. And I'm delighted she might win an Oscar. And I'm impressed that she was game to take on this kind of role. And I'm pleased that someone with her kind of name recognition is drawing attention to a very weird movie like this. But with respect to Demi Moore, for me, the headline of this movie is director Coralie Farja. This movie is propulsive and has a really sharp tone and is stylistic as hell, with dramatic camera angles, slow-mo, leering close-ups, bright costumes and production design, and occasionally bonkers performances. And the stylishness here is the inspiration of my favorite Letterboxd review of 2024. Well done. There's so much specificity and vision here, and for that I credit Coralie Farja. She's a French director, which I only mention because this movie does feel European.
I used to produce movies in the 80s. One critic called them European.
I guess what I mean by that is tonally and stylistically, it kind of feels like a Jean-Pierre Jeunet movie. It's in no way naturalistic, it's heightened and over the top, and the dynamic cinematography and editing lend themselves to the movie's surreal tone. The way it's shot makes you feel uneasy. This is never more apparent than in Elizabeth and Sue's encounters with a network executive played by Dennis Quaid. This network executive is named Harvey, and he's gross and intimidating and a creep. If you want subtlety, look elsewhere. The way he's shot and costumed and edited, and the way Dennis Quaid plays him at 11, he's basically a cartoon character.
So smile!
This is a body horror movie first and foremost, but it's also a satire of the entertainment industry. The movie's kind of bizarro tone allows for what I'll call a heightened experience of fame for both Elizabeth and Sue. I had put a pin in Elizabeth Sparkle being famous for hosting an aerobic class on TV. I need to emphasize that she is very, very famous. Her face is on billboards. She is recognized out in public constantly. She's a star on the Walk of Fame, seemingly off for doing aerobics for decades. And when you see her show, it's like a low-budget PBS-looking set. How are tens of millions of people watching this? The point here is how women of a certain age are discarded by Hollywood. Coralie Farja was inspired to write this as she was turning 40 and was afraid that she would be cast aside by the industry. So the world is very heightened in order to make Elizabeth and her replacement more famous, to make this point more blunt. Again, not very subtle, but you'll understand when you see the final 30 minutes, this movie is not aiming for subtle. I think what it's aiming for is to be creepy and gross and over the top, and to be, in its own way, thought-provoking. And blunt as it may be, I think it certainly succeeds in its aims. Alongside the body horror, there's a very human story here about fear of aging and fear of mortality and fear of your body breaking down, which is where the body horror comes in. Farja really wears her influences on her sleeve. I've already evoked the name of David Cronenberg, and any body horror movie is in debt to Cronenberg, but particularly one this gnarly. The first time we meet Dennis Quaid's character, the scene begins and ends with a lingering close-up of a fly, which I have to believe is a shout-out to the movie's template. Elsewhere, Stanley Kubrick is all over this movie, mostly in visual homage. There's some Clockwork Orange, some 2001, and kind of a lot of The Shining, particularly in the production design. I saw a few tweets from people criticizing this, claiming this was an empty homage, but I kind of disagree. The Shining and The Substance are both about isolation and addiction and self-destruction. I think there's enough similarity to justify the illusion. And even if there wasn't, I kind of don't care. Kubrick's movies were impeccably designed and looked really cool, so if this movie apes the impeccable design, great, we have another movie that looks really cool. What are we complaining about? Speaking of production design, maybe this is a dumb observation, but I like how the movie is kind of built for what I'll call an Instagram aesthetic. I already mentioned how the bright colors really pop, lots of pinks and yellows and blues, but also in the packaging and font of the substance itself. It's very minimalist, black font over white background or vice versa, and it looks like a Factor meal or like an RX bar. When Elizabeth opens her starter kit for the substance, it's shot like an unboxing video. Incidentally, or maybe not incidentally, the marketing budget for this movie was relatively small, but it became something of a word-of-mouth hit in part because it got a lot of engagement on TikTok and Instagram, and it appears to have been tailor-made to thrive in that medium. The design of the movie sells the movie. So I've been making a top 10 list for the past few years, and every year, as you can imagine, the Oscar movies are well represented, but there are also always several that crack my top 10 without getting any Oscar nominations. Example this year, I Saw the TV Glow knocked me on my ass, and I like that movie as much or more than many of the nominated movies. When I walked out of the theater in September, I kind of thought The Substance was destined to be another such zero nomination top 10 entry. A movie I really liked and absolutely one of my favorites of the year, but one I kind of doubt the Academy will like as much as I do. I'm very pleased to have been wrong. Here's a movie I quite enjoyed and certainly recommend, with some reservations. It's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but with the endorsement and backing of the Academy, I feel like less of a sicko for recommending it so emphatically.